The current support for our campus comes from the state, comes from tuition, which is about $5,600, and on average there's about $1,000 in fees across the various campuses, some a little lower, some a little higher. Now the fees are voted on, discussed with, and approved by students. They tend to be things that support campus climate, campus cultural activities, campus life, but also educational enhancements and endorsements. Those fees aren't used for the direct cost of instruction. That is a responsibility of the tuition and the state appropriation. So, for example, San Luis Obispo has a student excellence fee they've had for several years, and while nobody likes to pay more money, people have seen the value of that enhancement. So Fullerton is going through the deliberative process to decide, is charging X amount more per year, what's going to happen in terms of my learning environment and the time it will take me to get to degree? Is that a good use of resources or not? Sonoma has been going through the same kind of a process, and just today decided that it's not the right time to put a fee on for Sonoma. So it's very deliberative on the campus, engaging students in a free and open forum. Lots of points of views are heard. Ultimately, then it has to come to my office for vetting, but I do have the authority to approve fees, and when it makes really good sense, I will do that. If it just seems like a surrogate to not having enough dough in your pocket, I won't support them. It has to add value to the student experience.
Thank you very much, Chancellor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Skinner, and then Mr. Medina.
Thank you. I suppose I could call it a benefit, not sure, of having 6 brothers and sisters that live in California and multiple nieces and nephews that within my family, I think we've touched not every CSU, not every UC, not every community college, but a lot of them. And I am we're all products of California's public education system. None of my brothers and sisters or any of my nieces and nephews to date have attended any private schools or schools out of state. So I'm very, very proud that California has had such a strong role in education, and it was one of my motivations for going into the legislature was to continue that. And of course, we know that even before the recession, there were some derailments from our master plan, and I would like us to, get back on track regarding that, and also to look at whether the master plan needs updating. When I hear the conversation and I look at our documents, right now I'm looking at the LAOs, this is one of these tricky, what indicator do we as legislators, do we as the budget members use for either whether our funding is adequate or whether either university or CSU, it's a little different for community colleges, are using our funding adequately, and we're looking a lot at enrollment. And we know that all of your systems have a value to California much beyond the students that you serve. The students you serve is very, very important. It's very important. But your employers. You're huge economic engines in our communities in our state as a whole. You are the CSU and UC a little more so play a huge role in the economic development in the state in terms of the research, in terms of the spin-off companies, and they're just multiple. And when we look at documents like this, we have less of that information to weigh. But in the same terms, when we hear from you in indicating how many students perhaps you are serving that we're not funding, and I'm not bringing this up to debate it because I can appreciate you've got those students at a physical plant and you've got to provide them certain services, but of course we as legislators, we look at it that we provide, yes, general fund dollars directly to the systems, but we also fund Cal Grants. Now we're funding the Middle Class Scholarship. So we view it that we're providing additional support to students. Now, certainly it's not those dollars, well, you see them because they pay them in the tuition, right? But it's not like it's dollars that we're giving directly. But then the other issue when we look at just enrollment and we try to assess, okay, how many students maybe we're not funding, is that whole thing of out of state. Because, and I do think that we need to have that kind of diversity in our schools also. But hey, we're legislators, we're parochial. We might want to separate how we see the per student funding from, in terms of in-state versus out-of-state, right? I mean, our higher priority or commitment has got to be to funding slots and for our in-state students. So those are the things that make it, when I look at a lot of our documents, hard for me to sort of measure. But if I just go enrollment alone, and I look at, now I'll start with UC, in 2008-9, the state gave, the legislature and the budget gave in general fund $3.2 billion. So it's much more than, it's $400 million more than 13-14. Our provision of funds was 2.8. But in 8-9, the enrollment was the same as the enrollment now. So it was about 210,500 people, students at UC system. And what it indicates in the LAO document is 13-14 is about 210,986. In those interim years, where sadly we were making really serious cuts, UC's enrollment was way higher. Now, in fact, in 10-11, it was 214,692. Now, whether that was primarily out of state to make up for budget cuts, I'm not sure, but so for me, if we, and I don't know if enrollment targets are the right way to go, because clearly it was always above the enrollment targets we gave, but I certainly would want to see a higher enrollment goal than 2,200. Now, if I look at additional, when I look at CSU, the number of students during the time we were cut was way cut back. And, you know, and that may have been directly because of the budget cuts. I don't know. But in 2008-9, it was much higher than it is today. And I know that from the point of view of, and you're right, we can't look at just enrollment, we also have to look at completion and degree. But if we look at part of our funding of our higher education system is that economic benefit, then if we increase our funding to the system and there's fewer students, there's less economic benefit to us. There's still the economic benefit of the research activity and other activity, but there's less economic benefit because we're not training as much workforce, we're not. So I think that's some of the reasons we look at enrollment numbers and enrollment targets, even though I think it's also not the only or the best indicator. The other, if I go back to UC, if I remember correctly, the increase in tuition over the period from 2008 on, so if we look at that time period where we were making pretty significant cuts, and I don't have the data directly in front of me, but I think the tuition increases were proportionately larger than than the funding levels that we dropped. Maybe not at CSU, but I think they were. Maybe CSU can address it.
I can give you the rough numbers for CSU, but I was in the UC during the recession, and so I knew my campus numbers pretty well, and what we lost in state funding on the campus, and I think probably true for the system, but
was proportionally larger than.
Well, no, let me give you the CSU answer. CSU lost $1 billion in state support. Very rough numbers now, Assemblymember Skinner, $3 billion to $2 billion. Tuition increases and other adjustments in debt service got back in about $550 million. So we went down $1 billion in state support. We went back up $550 million on the backs of our students and their families. We're still in the hole, $450 million. So the first new appropriation to the CSU is in the current fiscal year, made in your deliberations last year, of $124 million. So we've gone from minus 450 to minus 325. The governor's proposed 142 takes us from minus 325 to minus to whatever, 325, 225, to 175. So from our vantage point, total resources available for the instructional
But you're looking at it as revenue and resources, which I appreciate, but I was looking at it from the hit on a student, meaning because I think probably from a revenue point of view, your proportion of revenue from student fees was lower proportionally prior to that. Right.
You bet.
But I don't mean that only. I mean that the percent increase to each student in terms of fee was proportionately greater than the percent decrease of general fund.
On a percentage basis, you bet, because the
Yeah.
bases are different. I mean, the student fees for CSU doubled and roughly the same for UC.
Right, doubled, and our
So 100%
wasn't
increase.
doubled.
Right. Well, but that's a percentage. We have to be careful, and I think our staffs can give you this in a better way we can in this setting. But when you're doing percentage cuts on vastly different bases, you're going to get wildly different percentages when the dollars. But what runs the university are the dollars, not the percentages. And during this time, we've had fixed cost increases, particularly on health care, but on energy and other things that have taken a lot of those resources out of the instructional picture as well. But we'll do a better analysis for you to help provide some clarity for the CSU.
Okay,
I don't know if President Napolitano wanted to make any comment to
sorry.
that.
I think I could, but I think for purposes of time, let me just echo what the Chancellor said. We have to be very careful of getting apples to apples, looking what was cut, what has been restored. Enrollment, as you say, is only one number. Time to graduation, I think, is an important number.
Right.
Time to graduation affects capacity, because the quicker we get students to degree, the more students we can take in the door. So if he's producing more students because the governor's giving him a 3% enrollment increase, we need an enrollment increase,
Right.
but we need actually to be able to look at that in terms of the capacity to get these students through and to graduation. And why does that make a difference? Because whether they're going on to postgraduate study or into the job market, they need to be able to get on with their lives. And every year they're not in school is a year that they're not acquiring.
Right.
So all of these things really need to be looked at together. And you cannot subtract or omit the increase in the fixed costs of a university system in looking at all of this.
Right.
During this period of recession, it's not as if the fixed costs of the university went down too.
Right.
It's not as if they stayed the same. They kept going up, and they went up a lot, especially healthcare. So that also cuts into whatever additional money was somehow found. Or another way of looking at it was also effectively a cut to the universities beyond what the legislature did. So that's why it's not a straight line. It's really looking at a variety of things together. The plain fact of the matter is now we can begin looking system-wide and holistically as what does it take, what do we need to do in California to maximize the ability of young people to go to college, and if they choose to go to a four-year school, to be able to go and to graduate and as close to 4 years as possible,
Right.
should they choose to do that.
Appreciate that.
One other just very quick point is for the CSU in particular, and I think the community colleges more than the UC, our student body isn't the student body that I was when I was a kid in the 60s and 70s. we have so many working adults. And so sometimes these numbers are head count versus full-time equivalents. And so I don't know which numbers are sitting in front of you, but I think that's the other part of it is, we always talk about the desirability of earning a 4-year degree in 4 years, but if you're a working single parent and you're only taking 6 credits
Right.
per term, you get done in 8 or 9 years, that's a tremendous achievement,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And so that's where these performance indicators have to be,
Right.
we have to measure what we value
Right.
and not value what we measure when it comes to performance indicators.
I'm glad you brought that up, and I don't have a particular answer right now on any of these questions, but in the panel prior to your joining us, of course, our discussion with the Department of Finance and LAO more, was that they feel that we should put certain requirements on, that we should, not increase funds to, say, CSU and UC without certain expectations, whether it's enrollment or I don't know how much they focused on time to degree, but things like that. And now, of course, constituents also want to see things like don't put requirements on keeping tuitions flat and wanting to see growth in enrollment. And I think that what we all have to engage in is sort of what are the best indicators, in addition to what's the appropriate, or I suppose before we can even determine what the appropriate level of funding that we should be providing to our systems is what are the things we're trying to achieve, and then how will we measure them. Yeah.
All right. In the interest of time, it is 5:10. My goal was to try to wrap this hearing by 5 o'clock. I'm going to have to limit the questions. So I know Mr. Nastandi had a question and Mr. Ting had a question, and then we'll have to wrap. In the interest of time, I want to give preference to the Budget Sub 2 hearings, and we still have public comments after this, and so that will be the last 2 questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll try and be brief. And to Chancellor White, if I can call on your expertise from both sides, the UC and the CSU system. Well, my premise is I don't think we're going to see a lot of cost savings, to be honest, going forward. As you mentioned, your costs are fixed to a large degree. I don't have faith that we're going to see much cost savings there overall. But so my question is, should we be doing our degrees or our whatever our end product is, degrees, differently? Meaning, should we push down more classes in, more AP classes from high school into community college, more community college classes, subtracting from the CSU or UC to save the cost there, have less time maybe at UC campus? And do we ever do any kind of audits through the system of the different majors? And are they useful? Are they connecting to jobs out in the community? Do we have a department or a major that really produces very little jobs outside of maybe going back to teaching in the university? Do we look at those? Are there cost savings within those programs, and maybe allocating those dollars to a major that is widely needed out in the community? And I apologize, anybody else could comment if they'd like.
So I think, Assemblymember Nastandi, I think it is important for us to think, as we think about the future, there should be no sacred cows, but there should be some value-based principles that drive those discussions. I know that the kinds of things about size of departments and how many majors really become a campus-based decision. And when there's an area of study where there's a lot of student demand and there's pressure at a campus level to do more of that. When a department atrophies and has more faculty than students, then there's a pressure to either close the department or to merge them or to integrate them, et cetera. That happens more at a local level, in my experience, both in the UC and the CSU, than some sort of a higher order system level directive. It's trickier to say, are they getting jobs in what they studied? For a variety of reasons. One is, if you study accounting, then your job's going to likely be in accounting. But so many of the majors in the humanities and in the sciences create educated individuals who learn how to problem solve, to think analytically, to communicate. They may study biology and go on and work as an entrepreneur in the Silicon Valley. Would we judge that as a failure in biology? Probably not, because they went and did something. So it's harder for the educated at the baccalaureate, master's, PhD level to say, if you study this, you're going to work in that area. I think it becomes more of a corollary when you get down to some of the vocational technical training. If you're going to learn those important skills for society, you're likely going to work in those skill sets. So it's a difficult one to crack.
How about, if I can ask really quick, how about pushing down, having, earning more credits below in the system, like say in high school, going into community colleges and so forth? Try and shorten the time and the heavier cost to balance, which is the UC system.
I do think we all have an interest in talking with the K through 12 to make sure that during their, I mean, starting in middle school really, but certainly in their high schools, that they're taking the right courses. The CSU put in an early assessment program in the 11th grade, which if you took that, Brian, or if I took it and it said, Tim, you need to do a little more in math in your senior high school year, and I did that, I'd get into a Cal State. So there has been a lot of interventions, but they're cooperative interventions. They're not mandated interventions to try and help students do the right things at that point in their life so the door stays open for things later in their life. Could there be more? Probably.
Appreciate it.
Mr. DeBobny.
First of all, Chancellor Napolitano, thank you so much for your service. Someone that graduated from the UC system, and really the whole state, we should be applaud you for taking on this new challenge after a long and distinguished career in public service. In your earlier comments, you mentioned that increased compensation for UC faculty and staff will be a priority. I hope with the new budget increases that we're discussing today, that the UC system will be able to come to an agreement with AFSCME and the support staff they represent to make sure that they're fairly compensated, but also prevent interruptions in services that are vitally important to the student body and to the institutions. And I really applaud you for your service once again and look forward to working with you for years to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And so we would like to thank and excuse the witnesses against President Napolitano, Chancellor White, Chancellor Harris. Thank you very much for joining us here today. We will now move into our public comments. I understand there was a group of CSU alumni that had some time constraints. They asked for preference. Do we have them lined up first? Yes. Okay, please come forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
I'm sorry?
I'd like to ask that each speaker try to limit their comments to 1 minute.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Members, my name is Mary Kite. I am a California native, also came up through the public school system, and I would like to say just one thing, since I do have the 1 minute, is that academically, I know that I received the best when I was coming up through school because I went on to get my master's. But I want to focus on resources. The resources within the institution, whether it was the junior high school, or the community college, were invaluable. I will tell you that I learned most from my instructors, counselors that were able to bring local resources to me at the institution. I come from a lower socioeconomic background back then, and that was extremely beneficial. On the other side of the resources is what the community could bring to the institution to give me some exposure for my career in the future. Mr. Chairman and members, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, my name is Ralph Jack. I'm a recently retired California City Manager, and I want to assure you that the education I got at Sonoma State was really the key to being very successful. I received a degree in economics, and it helped me throughout my career doing things like development agreements, partnerships with Chevron, and negotiating with unions, and many other things for those communities I lived in. I'm very proud to have served the communities, and I think that part of what the university system is doing is creating professionals who are giving back to the state of California. And I'm particularly concerned that there may be students out there like myself who were reluctant to go to college and maybe in that 30,000. And if you can see your way somehow to provide extra funding and get those students in, I think it would make a tremendous difference to their lives. It would be a great payback to the communities that they live in, and I think it would provide a great return on investment for the state. Thank you.
Chair and members, my name is Ryan Jacobson. I'm the CEO of the Fresno County Farm Bureau and a very proud two-time Fresno State graduate. When you talk about the CSU system, I think there's nothing that sums up that system better than the hands-on experience. And I am where I am today because of that experience. And one thing I want to leave you with, obviously I represent the ag industry and the importance of ag industry to my area. In the Central Valley, it's no secret 1 in 5 jobs related to agriculture, but the one statistic that just blows me away is slightly, when we talk about the U.S. college graduates with expertise in food, agriculture, and natural resource systems, there's slightly more than 54,000 annual job openings a year that need to be filled over the next 5 years. And so the CSU system is that place where we expect to get a lot of these fillings, and so, again, very supportive of the system. Thank you, guys.
Chair and members, good afternoon. My name is Tim Murphy. I'm the Director of Corporate Responsibility for Aerojet Rocketdyne. We are an aerospace defense company headquartered in Sacramento. We have sites in 16 states across the country. Of our 5,000 employees, more than 500 are graduates of the CSU system, making the CSU a valuable partner for our company. I just would like to stress, recently had the opportunity to tour Sac State, and their science building, it was built in 1967. We saw the facilities. They're in dire need of upgrade. And so for a company like ours that's an aerospace and defense company, very dependent upon tech and the ability to fill, for the CSU to fill the STEM pipeline, there are projected to be 3 million jobs in STEM fields that go unfilled within 4 years. The CSU is a great partner for Aerojet Rocketdyne in helping to fill that pipeline. I ask that you listen to Chancellor White's request for the $95 million in funding that would go to the CSU system. Thank you very much.
Patrick McCallum, representing the Los Angeles, Peralta, San Diego, Los Rios, Pasadena, Kern, and other community college districts, along with the LA College Guild. First of all, we want to thank the governor, Department of Finance, and his staff for proposing a budget that would exactly addresses what we need in the community colleges. $300 million focused on basic skills, student success, to take those students, 90% of the students in LACCD, Peralta District, come underprepared. And as Chancellor Harris said, only 40% of those succeed. That's going to be targeted into accelerated learning. We're going to do better. You're going to be able to measure it. What I want to address is this proposal around growth, the governor's 3% growth. We just strongly support it. We dropped 500,000 students in 5 years. His proposal would add 60,000 on top of the 40,000 this year. We're still 400,000 short. Those Aerojet and those employers that you talked about, they're coming to us adding for new programs. That's 20. If you go to 2%, that's 20,000 students and 2 million that don't get an education. So we're strongly supporting it. Our districts can grow right beyond the 3%. They could probably take the 20,000 students alone. For the districts that are not growing, like San Francisco, there's a Leno bill to kind of deal with that issue. That's a legitimate issue. There are other bills that are coming out dealing with M.Ed education that deals with part of those 12 districts. They're in small districts, so I think there are ways that we'll work the Chancellor and the Governor's office how we can deal with those issues. But we'd also like to ask Skinner and that we get an early notice on this. I know it's unusual, but if the subcommittee sends a signal on 3%, we're going to start adding those courses immediately for workforce, for transfer, and remediation. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Sonia Soltani, and I am a graduating senior at San Francisco State University. I'm here to represent all CSU students today, and thank you for your time. So first off, I'd like to start by saying that, the CSU has made many great strides to improve the welfare of our students and our system, but we still face many pressing issues today. And so, as such, I speak on behalf of all CSU students when I ask humbly that you consider and advocate for an additional $95 million to be added to the governor's budget proposal. This is not just a $95 million that is the difference between the Board of Trustees proposal and the budget proposal. It's a difference between the livelihoods of our students that will drive the future of our California economy. A budget that, in Chancellor White's words, isn't about serving the CSU, but is instead about serving families, children, and citizens who, again, will prove to be economic drivers for our great state. In advocating for $95 million to be added to the budget, you'll be standing by us. You'll be making history in educating a workforce who will be able to say proudly, like myself, that I'm proud to be made in the CSU. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. My name is Tomas Ortega. I'm also a student at San Francisco State University. I'm actually a super duper senior. So I greatly ask for you to help advocate on our behalf for the $95 million. For students like me and even students behind me, I'm actually an international relations major, which is not an impacted major by any sense. However, I have run into issues where I haven't been able to get my classes because of the bottlenecks. The bottlenecks that we're experiencing because there's students trying to jump into these classes, and it's forcing me to not be able to take classes that I need, even though I'm going at a very deliberate pace. I'm a transfer student. I'm a transfer student, and I've already spent a year and a half at the Cal State system, so I'll be graduating in 3 years. But really, the reason I'm taking this pace is because the CSU experience, it shouldn't be just the classroom setting. The university system is to create and help develop well-rounded individuals by getting involved on campus, being able to volunteer or even pick up internships. That way we can greatly prepare ourselves for when the time comes that we do graduate, where we can just walk right into the workforce as opposed to waiting around and saying, well, what is this degree going to do for me? So we greatly need that funding so we can make the best use of our experience there at our 4-year, or in my case sometimes 5 or 6 year bachelor's degrees. So thank you.
Well, thank you for your time. My name is Arnold Mesa. I'm currently an employee of the UC system. I'm from UC Berkeley. And as I was sitting here, we're talking about the students, their future, and how we can provide better things for them. Well, I'm a service worker at the system, and I'm a custodian there. I've been there for 25 years. And what I do is I try to provide the best service for all the students, just like my brothers and sisters in all the campuses. But one thing that is real is the fact that every time that the UC comes to Sacramento and asks for money, it's like now $3 million, they say that they will provide better quality of services to the students. It's not always true, because we always short staff. People are injured because of the short staffing. Buildings are growing in square footage. And one of the things that is real is the fact that a lot of my brothers and sisters, over the years, they end up with some serious injuries, whether it's shoulder injuries, back injuries. This is reality. People that, when they retire, they can say to one another, you know what, I did work for this system. You know what? You want to know why? Because I got busted shoulders, a bad back, and you know what? My retirement is in jeopardy. It's always an issue with his retirement or medical. And let me say one thing. All the service workers through the whole state of California, we marvel and giving the students the best service, because they're a future of our state. But then again, when it comes down to seeing us as people that also are part of the system that make it grow and make it what it is now, we're not even seen as those people. We're seen as second-class citizens. And to me, that bothers me a lot. When I do the best and I show the students and I tell them, you know what, I'm here to provide you the service that you deserve, that the service that you need, so when you come to your classroom or your lecture room, you know that there's people here that provide the service that you deserve, that you're paying for. But when it comes down, the bottom line here is this: if we don't keep an eye on where the money goes to, a lot of the times it doesn't go where they tell you it's going to. And I'm here to give you an update. A lot of times when UC comes up here and says, give us this money, give us a blank check, it always goes where it shouldn't go. It goes to executives' pockets where it shouldn't go. And we got tuitions going up. They might sit here and say, oh no, tuition's not going up, but in reality it goes up. Down the year, it will go up. Something will come, you read in the paper, tuitions are going up. And that's the reality. I've been at UC for 25 years, and let me tell you, this is a serious thing that's going on, and that's a quick update. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair and members, Terry Brennan on behalf of SEIU California. First, I want to support my brothers and sisters that asked me. They're struggling and need all the help you can do when you deliberate this spring. Additionally, when we had difficult budgetary and political times recently, we cut the budgets of UC and CSU roughly a third. One of the victims of that was the UC Labor Center, which was cut fully by 67%. They went from, they could look around and say 2 out of every 3 workers were gone as part of the budget cut. So as we go forward through the spring, May revise and deliberations, I'd really encourage you to keep in mind that we want to also restore that some sort of agreement for fully funding those research centers. They're one of the few operations in the UC system that actually deliver product and reach out to communities of color, to working Californians, and we appreciate your consideration of that. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Javier Garcia. I'm a member of AFSCME 3299. I was hired by UCLA as a limited senior custodian. I worked there for over 1,000 hours. That's roughly 6 months. By the words of my own supervisor, he said, Javier, you're a good worker. And instead of making me a career senior custodian, they let me go, even though there were 10 senior custodian career openings. I love what I do. I love to provide a clean environment for the students so they can learn in a clean environment. I came to UCLA looking for a better future, and as it is now, I cannot afford full rent for me and my wife, so we can be independent. I rent out of my mother's house. I challenge you to find out why they are not hiring, and to ask you not to give UC a blank check. Thank you for your time.
Hello, my name is Diana Robles. I work at the UC Medical Center here in Sacramento. As you know, UC is not just schools, but they have the facility where they're training doctors and residents. But I do work there in dietary. I've been there for 11 years. I serve the patients their meals. I know today they're asking for all this money, but they make all this profit every day on surgeries, which I don't understand how they can even ask for money. But I know with the money they have, they're not spending it right. They're lining their pockets, the regents and the president and all the big wigs. But then at the bottom, they're just cutting back on good workers. They're subcontracting. They want to spend less money on workers to save money. And to me, that's a joke. I have a personal experience where I was training a subcontractor, and this young lady didn't care about her job. It's very important in the hospital when we have diabetic children that we don't serve their meals to them, because the nurse needs to make sure they get insulin and measure their glucose. And I had ran it by this young woman many times how important it is you don't serve them their food, and she still did it. She didn't care, and she just said, "Oh, I forgot." And I had to, go and fix the situation. Luckily, the nurse was there and took care of it and was like, "I'm going to go in the room right now. I'm going to make sure the child doesn't eat. It's okay." But I can't imagine, any other situations that are out there because they want to save money. They want to use subcontractors. I don't think that's right for the patients. And, they need to spend the money right, and you need to hold them accountable to that. Thank you.
Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Liz Ortega. I'm the political director for AFSCME 3299. And as we've heard today, many things were talked about and discussed in terms of additional money for students. But with the exception of Ms. Skinner, the people that were left out were the workers. And I want to share with you, like you've already heard, we represent over 22,000 UC workers, many of whom are currently depending on public assistance, and many whose jobs are being outsourced. And so the back of that burden is being put on California taxpayers. While UC is spending more and more in taxpayers' funds on lavish pay, pensions, and other perks for its growing ranks of administrations, the income gap in UC is widening, and outsourcing of career jobs to unexperienced contractors paying rock-bottom wages without benefits is increasing. The result is more injuries, like you've heard, more dangerous facilities, like you heard, and fewer middle-class jobs, and more UC workers having to rely on public assistance, programs financed by taxpayers. So, as the budget season continues and we have more hearings, I would ask each and every one of you to think about that, and to think about this. As UC executives bestow upon themselves outside salaries, huge salaries, salaries we could never even think of unless we win the lotto, and entitlements, the UC's lowest wage workers struggle to make ends meet, struggle to pay their rent, struggle to put food on their tables, struggle to send their children to the same university that they work for, and go home with debilitating injuries. So as you think about continuing to give UC more money and more blank checks without accountability, I want you to think about these workers and the 22,000 other workers that we represent. Thank you.